A lot of people are going to really like this movie, but that doesn't mean it's good. Hello, hedgehogs and homicidal maniacs. My name is TV Skyen, and one of the a lot of people who are going to like the Sonic the Hedgehog movie is me. I liked it a lot. And the reason I liked it is that I have a nostalgic soft spot for Sonic. The very first console I ever owned was a Sega Master System 2 with the Master System version of Sonic installed in the machine. And while I'm not the biggest Sonic fan in the world, I did try to keep up with the little blue blur and play his games occasionally, and loved his Game Boy Advance and DS games, wasn't so much into Sonic Adventure as everybody else was. But basically, for the entire movie, I was sitting in the theater just spotting little references and hints and callbacks and Easter eggs that were designed specifically for people like me to sit around the entire movie and spot them, and that was very entertaining, which is a good thing because the movie itself kind of isn't. Like, this is an extremely bog-standard family action comedy that really doesn't try to do anything interesting at all with its premise or its story or the characters that are involved with it. Like, Sonic opens the movie with this whole interesting backstory that seems like the backbone of a much more interesting movie, and then he shows up on Earth and hangs out with James Marsden in a generic small town, a generic highway, and a generic cityscape, because those are the kinds of cheap shooting locations that you can get for a bog-standard action family comedy. And as an action family comedy, it's mediocre. Like, there really isn't very much there. Sonic and James Marsden's sheriff guy go on a road trip to get Sonic's magic rings back so he can get away from Earth and get away from Robotnik. And pretty much every single cliche and expected story point that you would expect to have happen with an odd couple who are going on a long road trip while being pursued by a villain pretty much happen in the order that you think they're gonna happen in, and in exactly the way that you think they're gonna happen. And as a result, all of the characters are extremely shallow. Like, Sonic has a sympathetic backstory, he's very lonely, he's trying to find a family, and that's all very well animated and comes across fine, but there's no, like, outside of the human characters happening to be in the same place as Sonic, there's literally no reason to care about them because they don't have personalities, pretty much. So I'm ragging on this movie, and that's because I want you to know what it is that you're walking into when you decide to go see Sonic the Hedgehog. There aren't really any surprises in this movie. There really isn't any emotional depth. You're not gonna go into the movie and see anything that you weren't expecting to see when you watched the trailers. So if you're a kid, like 5 to 12 years old, you're gonna have a blast with this movie because this movie was designed specifically to be a blast for kids who are about 5 to 12 years old. Sonic is the exact right mix of enthusiastic and obnoxious that's, gonna be funny to kids who are 5 to 12 years old, and Jim Carrey's over-the-top, silly, ridiculous Eggman is going to be freaking hilarious to kids, which I know because I was sitting next to a couple of them, and they loved every minute of him being on the screen. But this is not Detective Pikachu. Like, this is not a movie that is using a classic games franchise to do something kind of interesting and offbeat with a unique aesthetic and a kind of interesting plot and an interesting world to be in. It's just a family action comedy. So unless you're a kid or an adult with a lot of nostalgic fondness for Sonic, I really can't recommend this movie to you because there's nothing for you to see here. There's nothing that's gonna interest you as someone who isn't already into Sonic to begin with. And with all of that being said, with all of the skepticism and sober critical distance out of the way, I really liked this movie anyway. Like, yes, I was mostly entertained because the movie is full of Sonic references and that's very entertaining to me, but I was nonetheless entertained. Most of the visual effects budget clearly went into Sonic, and the rest of it into Eggman/Robotnik's flying robots and drones. And it is and remains a goddamn travesty that the visual effects team who managed to so successfully update Sonic's entire animation set in this entire goddamn movie had their studio shut down and all got laid off almost immediately after completing their work. It would have been a travesty even if the animations and effects hadn't been any good and had still been the nightmare version of Sonic that was initially offered up, but it's not. Sonic is very well animated. He moves in a very believable way that communicates a lot of cartoonish charm and fun. His design is well put together, his speed sequences especially are extremely cleverly constructed, and he looks just enough like his video game incarnations without looking too much like them and ending up looking like he's completely out of place. Like, he looks just real enough to avoid the uncanny valley where his previous design was so fatally stuck. And speaking of visual effects, like the intro to this film where we see Sonic sort of more or less in his natural environment, is a brief, fully animated sequence, but if that's the proof of concept for maybe letting Sonic go traveling other worlds in the sequel, holy crap, I'm up for that, because that sequence alone looks like the foundation of an exceptionally good adaptation to Sonic that would be way more faithful to the video games without ever having the problem of feeling cheap. And for what it's worth, from what I can tell from the coda of this movie and the post-credits scene, because of course there is one, that kind of much more animated sequel is exactly the kind of thing that they're hoping to set up for. On the assumption, of course, that Sonic makes enough money that a studio wants to shell out the incredible amount of cash that it's going to take to realize an entire movie in that style. Which isn't really a reason to go and see this film, by the way. Like, don't go see this movie because you want to support it financially or whatever, because yeah, the studio listened to the fans, as it were, and gave Sonic a non-shit design, but then they also fired the team responsible for giving him that non-shit design and put them all out on the street immediately after they completed work on the movie. So, you know, if you do want to watch the movie and you feel like you can wait, my recommendation is just wait until it's either on Netflix or video on demand, or inevitably ends up in the bargain bin of Blu-rays at your local Walmart. So yeah, to sum up, I had a lot of fun with Sonic, but that's because I'm exactly the kind of person who would have a lot of fun with a really mediocre, average Sonic movie, and that's really ultimately what this is. It ended up a lot better than it could have been with the horrifying original design that they were going to go with, but just because I had fun with it, and lots of people are going to have fun with it, doesn't mean it's an especially good movie. If they do a sequel, I hope it's fully animated in the style of the introductory sequence and dives fully into the visual universe of Sonic, with Jim Carrey reprising his role as Eggman, because he really genuinely does a fantastic job making that character fun to look at. But this movie on its own, yeah, it's not gonna be a classic, but it's good enough for what it is. Hey, thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this look at the Sonic movie, please feel free to hit the like, comment, and subscribe buttons because they make numbers go up, and numbers going up is the only thing that YouTube really cares about. I have a Patreon, I have a merchandise store, I have a tip jar. If you want to avail yourself of any of those, you should feel very free to do so. If you don't want to support me directly, that's completely fine. Believe me, I get it. But at the end of my videos, I do try to encourage people to, generally speaking, support the content that they love with whatever they can, whenever they can. Because for online content creators, that $1 donation can be literally the same as thousands of views on a video, and that matters a heck of a lot, especially to smaller creators who are creating niche content that the algorithm isn't going to support. So whether it's me or someone else, please support the content creators whose work you enjoy, because that's the only way that they're gonna get to do it. Anyway, if you haven't enjoyed this video, then you can hit the dislike button down below, or you could wait 12 months and you'll get to see the updated visual overhaul of the dislike button that looks less like a horrifying monstrosity that will hunt you in the night and eat your toes.